This week on the Woven Energy Podcast.
Remember what I said about animism being a state of being? It's not something that you choose to be, it's something that you are. And that technique will address not just Bhatt, but it will also start to help you with the next level of shamanism, the Amskar. Tor-Shil-Teen is done with no desire for the future and no thought or clinging to the past. Imagine you're in a business meeting and you start pulling the guy next to you's ear to see what'll happen or something like that, you know. Adults tend to frown on this kind of thing, and you probably get chucked out of the business meeting if you start doing that kind of thing. Human beings tend to think of nature as simple. It's like binary. Oh, either I can get across the stream or I can't. But actually, the reality of nature is wonderfully and bewilderingly complex. It's fantastic, and what a great way to practice your Chalicity. Tor-Shil-Teen has kind of that lyric, all you need is love, you know? And this is said in shamanistic circles a lot.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 8 of the Woven Energy Podcast. I'm here once again with Damon Smith to talk about, as always, shamanism from the ground up. Our mission through these podcasts is to lay down a complete resource for shamanism as it used to be and as it used to be practiced. So for today, we are going to continue this week with our theme of where do I begin with learning shamanism? Or if you like, how do I become a shaman? And to crystallize what the first stage of shamanism actually is, we call this Chalicity in English, which is a made-up word to try and give the best kind of flavor or essence. And it means to be a bit like a chalice, you know, be the cup ready to be filled, emptying yourself, preparing yourself to let nature in. In Mongol, this is called the Bak Tam Stay Saub, if I've got that right. Chalicity is a state. It's a natural state you can put yourself in, and it forms the foundation of shamanism, maybe like a pillar in the supporting structure of shamanic technique. So last week we talked about the first component of Chalicity, which is called Bhatt in Mongol. This week we are going to kick off with Bhatt again and go through another exercise you can do. But I also want to go over last week's exercise again and crystallize it for you in a clear step-by-step way so you can go away and do it with no doubt as to what you are doing. But first, what's Chalicity? What really helped me in last week's episode to get a more solid understanding of what Chalicity is was Damon's example of the eagle and the goshawk. It was probably my favorite part of the episode, and the eagle, with its incredible visionary perception, can't possibly absorb all the information coming into its brain on the baseline alone. The baseline being its thinking mind, its rational or logical mind, you know, oh, there's a rabbit, taking all the information it sees and processing it in a rational way, so to speak. It has to merge with nature in a way that it can pick up on very subtle cues to sense its prey from such a long distance and such a wide field of view. And it does this in the eagle's version of a state of Chalicity. But also think of the goshawk flying through the undergrowth at such speeds and agility. It's like a Formula One driver going at, say, 5 times the normal speed on a dirt track without knowing its road. It's inconceivable. The goshawk has to have a certain connection to its surroundings and be guided by the spirit of the place. Certainly not thinking, oh, there's a branch coming up, I better swerve to the right. If it thinks about it, it'll break its neck. This state the animals are in, when doing what they do, can give a flavor of what Chalicity is. Now, our natural state of Chalicity as human beings is different to that of a bird or that of any other animal, but it's there. And studying the animals can be very enlightening for us in getting in touch with our own nature and our own Chalicity that's unique to us as human beings. So, in a nutshell, Chalicity is about getting rid of stuff, absorbing the information from our surroundings unfiltered. You know, the mind's baseline desire to filter and categorize things, well, we have to get rid of that. If the eagle thinks, it loses its prey. If the goshawk thinks, it breaks its neck on a branch. So we have to start this process of developing Chalicity by developing the ability to shut down our thoughts and start letting nature in unfiltered in a kind of state of presence. So I've talked enough, and I want to bring Damon in. Now, before I get into the actual step-by-step process from last week's episode, Damon, are you with us?
Hi, Joe.
Cool. Is there anything you want to add or clarify with what I've just said?
No, I think that was a reasonable summary. The state of Chalicity, a reiteration rather than adding. The state of Chalicity isn't a state of being. It's very easy when we talk about things in general in daily life as human beings. it's very, very easy to think of things as conceptual, to think of things as something that as we've said before, that I analyze and then come to some sort of conclusion about or some sort of categorization for. Chalicity, however much we break it down, we've broken it down into Bhatt, Tor-Shil-Teen, Guchach, as I said, I think on one of the podcasts, there are other ways of looking at Chalicity, many other ways of looking at Chalicity. So, for instance, one would be there's a people in Siberia. They're not the famous ones. They're not the famous Tungus people, the Evenki people, from whose language the actual word shaman comes. Though they are very closely associated with these people. These are people called the Yakut, and they have a rather different. Well, it's not different. It's the same thing. It's still Chalicity. But they're incidentally, they're one of the most shamanistic peoples today, as things stand today in the world. And there's kind of historical reason for why they're still so shamanistic. And that, ironically, is because of, we talked about when society, when civilization arose, it tended to suppress shamanistic activity. And ironically, relatively recently, we were talking about 17th century, so 1600s. This happened to the Yakut. Christian forces went into their area of Siberia and brutally suppressed them. I mean, it was to the point where 70% of the Yakut population actually died. Were killed or died as a result of the kind of violence and suppression. And I think partially because of this, they have held to their shamanistic origins, held onto them actually very vehemently. And they are a really interesting people. But the particular aspect of Yakut shamanism, that I wanted to make reference to in relation to your question is they combine. You remember we said the first two levels, Bak Tam Stay Saub and the Amskar, the breath. And some
sorry, just to cut the stages of shamanism now, not the components of Chalicity.
Yeah, sorry, you're quite right.
Breath,
the stages of becoming a shaman, if you like. In that society, kind of, we said there's usually 7 steps, but they're not always looked at in the same way. And they have this wonderful verb in their language called tilin, in the Yakut language, which obviously there is no English translation of, but it is a wonderful verb. And it sort of means to come alive, to blossom, to come into the world. And there's a shamanistic exercise that I use that sort of combines. You were asking me last time about is there some simple exercise that people could do, or simple technique that people could apply in order to work on their Chalicity or to work on their Bhatt? This particular shamanistic exercise is based on this kind of shamanistic technique. Is based on this Yakut concept of tilin, or it's based on, it's kind of working on Bhatt, but at the same time working on Amskar. And it might be worth taking a moment just to describe it in case somebody wanted an alternative to the, we talked about finding a place to stand up high or finding a place by the sea or by a lake to practice Chalicity. This particular exercise, which I actually call the technique tilin. That's it to a Yakut shaman. That has a much broader context. This technique would be part of that, but it would have a much broader meaning. Tulin is a big deal to a Yakut shaman, but to me, because most of my shamanistic terminology is in Mongol, not in Yakut, I tend to call this thing Tulin. So, as we said before, you want an open posture with your Chalicity. It helps to have an open posture, a posture that's open to the world. And as I've said before, I often adopt a position with my palms slightly turned upwards, with my hands extended in either out to the sides or upwards or both. And I will stand, usually obviously not with my feet tight together. They don't have to be particular wide. Actually, if you see me really getting into my spirit dance, then you probably see my feet go quite wide as I'm moving, but that's a dynamic thing. And that has to do with the power and the flow of the energy in that. But just for practicing Chalicity, shoulder width or slightly more than shoulder width is fine. And in this Tulin technique, there's a position like you're a bird with folded wings. So one of the things throughout what I'm about to describe, one of the things that's important is that you are relaxed. Your hands are almost always throughout the exercise, the palms are slightly turned upwards towards the sky. They don't have to be pointing at an exact 90-degree angle towards the sky, but they tend to be turned upwards throughout. The folded wing position is with the wrists crossed directly in front of the body. And this position, remember we talked a little bit about Amskar, in that we said it was a good idea for moving into Amskar to observe yourself and your breathing very lightly. So this also, when I'm saying do these things, because some of these exercises or techniques are more complicated than others. This one I thought was relatively simple, that we could describe it in a podcast rather than doing a video or something. But you need to use that lightweight observation of your breathing, and to a certain extent you need to take some sort of control of your breathing, because I'm going to describe you breathe in on this bit, you breathe out on that bit. When you're doing this technique, don't concentrate too heavily on your breathing, because that will drag you down into the roots of the tree. So it's that kind of lightweight. Now, if you've been out practicing that kind of thing, we talked about like a spirit animal looking over your shoulder, rather than you directly absorbing yourself in a heavyweight way. Hopefully, as time goes by, you'll get some sort of idea about how your breath works in relation to your movement and your intention. So from this folded wings position, in the folded wings position, incidentally, the fingers are separated. You don't hold them tight together, but they're separated. The hands throughout the movement tend to stay in line with the forearm. What I mean by that is there's no bending at the wrist anywhere, but the wrists aren't held rigidly solid. They're very relaxed. Everything's very relaxed. And from the folded wings position, you start to practice your Chalicity. You start to practice your Bhatt. We talked about the sense, the Burg Shikhar Tarate, the sense of being keen, you could say keenly sighted, but unfocused in the way that an eagle is, or Hatzog, which you've been referring to as Goshawk. Holding on to the environment, holding on to the woven tapestry, or the weave of nature.
The woven energy.
The woven energy, if you like. While practicing that in this folded wings position, which is simply, your hands out, and then you cross the wrists in front of your body. From that folded wings position, lightly observe your breathing. And when you find yourself about to breathe in, turn your upper body slightly to the left, and then turn it back slightly to the right. And as the in-breath builds, you spread your hands wide back into the palms up, embracing nature position. So it's the same position we've been talking about, but it's a way of entering that position on an in-breath. And as you do that, feel like you're drawing in the environment. Feel like you're drawing in the environment through your eyes, through the top of your head, through your hands, through your feet, and drawing it in from your extremities into your center, into the center of your body. Again, don't imagine it. Just, you want to adopt that feeling. It doesn't matter. Take it from me, scientifically speaking, that's not exactly what's going on, but you can get a sense of that. So if one of the things you can think about is shamanism, especially esotericism, they're frameworks. They deal with reality, or in their correct sense, they deal with reality.
Yeah.
But they deal with it in a way of kind of rules of thumb, or ways, relatively simple ways of making sense. And when I say make sense, top line, midline, baseline, all acting together as one.
Yeah. Mind and body and spirit.
Yeah, they make sense out of what is actually, physiologically speaking, biologically speaking, very, very complex stuff that's going on behind the scenes. One day, I hope we'll get far enough with these podcasts that we can start looking at the science behind this. It is something that I've spent a lot of time on in my life. And the science, unfortunately, the science behind it is extraordinarily complicated. And it has, it's multifaceted as well. So what shamanism has done over the eons is built a framework that helps you deal with complex things, in relatively simple ways. You can draw an analogy with, for instance, Newton's laws and Einstein's laws. Newton's laws are not as accurate as Einstein's laws, but they're much easier to work with. So today, many scientists still work with Newton's laws whenever they can get away with it, because they're good enough. Because the calculations involved in Einstein's laws are so complex that they'd rather not go down that route unless they absolutely have to. I know there are times when they do have to. So you can think of shamanism like this, instead of being in terms of physics, in terms of nature and understanding the natural world. So from that folded wings position, you turn two ways as the breath builds, as the in-breath builds. You can think of in-breath as building. You turn two ways, and then you turn back the other way. So if I've turned left to begin, then I turn right, and then I spread my hands as I'm turning to the left, which brings me back to the front, to the open position. From here, I continue to breathe in. So this is a long in-breath we're doing. This is why you do have to take some level of control over your breath. But you want to do this in the lightest possible way. You bring your hands upwards, so you're raising them up as if you're trying to embrace the sky. And you bring them up till they're about shoulder width, high above your head, and the palms face both upwards and slightly to the back. From here, you've been breathing in all this time, so this is a very big in-breath. From that position, you hold that position until your out-breath starts to build. And as your out-breath builds, you gradually and naturally allow them to come down, as if you're gathering something to yourself, as if you're embracing something. And they come down back into that folded wings position. One of the things you can do for some level of sophistication in this, so you're not getting too one-sided with it, is if the previous time on the in-breath, obviously you can then repeat on the next breath. If the folded position on the in-breath went to the left, to the right, and then open back to the left again, this time you can go to the right, to the left, and open back to the right again. Now this is quite a good exercise. As I said, I call it Tulin, after this Yakut, this amazing Yakut word that obviously there's no equivalent of in English. Coming alive, blossoming, but in terms of, it's not just like a flower opening, it's like in terms of the vitality turning on inside a living organism. And I find this incredibly good exercise when I don't feel so good. It's incredibly enlivening technique, it's Tulin technique. And it's an alternative we were talking about, people who live in a city and there were some difficulties with practicing the one I described last time. So I just thought it's probably good, even though we're here supposed to be talking about tor-shil-teen, while we're still on the subject of Bhatt, to bring in that technique. And that technique will address not just Bhatt, it's very good for Bhatt, but it will also start to help you with the next level of shamanism, the amskar, what we describe as breath.
That sounds like a great exercise to do, especially if it moves us forwards towards stage 2 of shamanism, which I'm sure everybody will be eager to do. But it sounds like a really good extension on last week's exercise as well, which I want to go into in a bit more detail. So let's just take a minute to look at last week's exercise. I thought what we went over last week was really good, but I did feel like the exercises needed solidifying, kind of crystallizing. So what I want to do is make this as simple as possible for people and lay down what we discussed step by step, so everyone has a path to follow. And cool. We both know this is hard to do as they kind of merge together. But anyway, so guys, for me. And I'm going to get Damon to jump in when I'm finished, but this is about the exercise we did last week was about the first component of Chalicity, which is Bhatt. In English, it kind of means discipline or steadfastness. So step 1 is to develop the ability to still your thoughts, quiet the mind, stop that background chatter that goes on in our minds. And as Damon has said in a previous episode, develop the ability to simply sit for extended periods of time and quote unquote think of nothing. Now, there are lots of resources out there that can help you with this under the guise of meditation, so long as the exercises don't involve the use of imagination. It's really important that it doesn't involve imagination. It's also important not to get too wrapped up in this stage. It's not the be-all and end-all of shamanism. It's rather regaining a basic skill that's lost that we all really should have. So one basic exercise for this could be to sit quietly and try to focus on your breath. You can do this to a count or simply acknowledge breathing in and out. And if you find your mind wandering, acknowledge your thoughts and just let them dissipate. 20 minutes a day is good. Just set 20 minutes aside and do this every single day. Then step 2, this feels like where last week's exercise begins. So step 2, find somewhere you can see far. It could be looking over the sea. It could be a lake. It could be the top of a long street or even a skyscraper looking out over a city. Although the less populated, the better. But sometimes this isn't possible. And what you need to do is open yourself up physically, palms out. You could even open your arms a bit, like embracing the surroundings. For the more observant of you, you could look at our standard image on the Woven Energy Facebook page of the nice-looking girl with her arms open. It's a bit exaggerated, but along the lines of what I'm talking about.
Well, actually, very close. I tend not to. I tend not to spread my arms. This is for much later stuff. This is for when we get into the actual, well, I wouldn't say it's much later. We'll get on to stage 3 when we're talking about spirit dance. Mm-hmm. I tend not to spread my arms so that they would go actually literally out 180 degrees for each other. So I would tend to have, I don't know, 140 degree spread between my arms. So, again, don't drag it on the baseline. But there are issues with the continuity, the continuousness, the flow. You remember we talked about my definition of the word flow.
Yes.
That moving your arms out quite that far. I mean, you could do it. The time that would happen to me is if I'm moving at fairly high speed and I'm really deep in the shamanistic state, in the spirit dance, and then they would just go there through their own momentum. Yeah. But for this particular exercise, you want to feel very natural. You don't want anything that's very, very awkward or
put on.
But if it feels, I guess I'm thinking of Julie Andrews is it Julie Andrews in the Sound of Music? The hills are alive with the sound of music.
Yeah.
I might have the wrong actress. But if you feel like doing that and it's genuinely your spirit that's driving you there, then do. Yeah. Then do. Yeah.
But don't do it because Damon and Joe say so.
Yeah. But what I would say that was quite a good photo that you used. It's not a million miles away from what we're talking about.
Okay, great. So back to the exercise. Let's use a lake for an example, but it's anywhere you can see far. So you stood by the lake, you're gazing out over the expanse, and you relax your gaze, you breathe deep, and this is kind of where stage one comes in. You want to still your thoughts, and this is where it becomes a bit more focused than ordinary meditation. Try to absorb what you see unfiltered and try to pick up on the subtle energy changes within your field of view. Shut down those categorization filters.
I was just sorry, Joe. I was just going to say, rather than using the words try to pick up on, I would say allow to come to you.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. So, allow to come to you those subtle energy changes.
One of the things with turning off your filtering, which is what we're trying to do here, is that it's that feeling of embrace. The way in which a shaman picks up on all that stuff that ordinary people don't pick up on is, to a very large extent, is the shaman does not reject it. And people don't think about rejecting a lot of the sensory information that's coming to them, but they do. They reject a huge amount of it for the purposes of expediency, for reasons relating to the miasma, for lots and lots of different reasons. They do. Take it all. Take it equally. Don't place importance on one thing rather than another. You know, the sound of a seagull versus the sound of a wave versus the sound of the little pebbles moving in the foam versus the sound of the wind versus any other sounds or sights that you might see. It all comes. It's all welcome. There's no distinction. There's no discrimination. There's no judgment. It's all completely welcome.
Well, and I liked when you compared that to the eagle soaring high above that vast vicinity, picking up on those cues, absorbing them in the mind, the body, and the spirit, not in the mind alone. And that's why I was trying to talk a little bit about step one, which is simply just quietening those thoughts. And it's kind of a difficult thing because you can practice stage one whilst doing stage two. You know, you can do that. But can you purely do stage two without the ability of stage one? No, I don't think so.
It builds.
It joins in with each other, doesn't it? So there's no harm in practicing stage one, sat in a chair at home in your living room. There's no harm in spending 20 minutes a day sat trying to quieten those thoughts and still your mind. But stage two is where it becomes more focused and develops your Chalicity. So is that correct, Damon?
Yeah, you have to be careful with the word focus. Because to a certain extent, it's unfocused. It's welcoming all and everything. But it's disciplined. It has Bhatt. We're back to this word, Bhatt. You know, I keep trying to use English and end up with it exhibits Bhatt. It exhibits Tor-Shil-Teel. Remember what we said. If the eagle doesn't accept all, then the eagle goes hungry. Because of our buffer zone, if I don't accept all, I can still go around the supermarket. So there's a bit of a difference there. But to do it, I have to a certain extent, take on that spirit that the eagle has, the Tor-Shil-Teel.
Would you say Chalicity is a completely normal to us as human beings? It's just we have lost that focus. Yeah, exactly.
It was.
So it was before we became a civilized species. Would you say that?
Yeah. Yes. And what I would say is, for instance, the people like the Yakut that I mentioned, you will find among them a lot more people in general exhibiting a higher level of Chalicity than we do day to day, even though they have had the miasma landed on their heads in a very painful way. They're somewhat, I mean, some of them still live by hunting, especially in the far north of Siberia. Some of them still live by hunting. So you can see, you know, they are closer than us to the source. And this is why, you know, we said shamanism is found all over the world, but it's everywhere all over the world. It's been influenced to some extent by the miasma. But in Siberia in particular, at a time when that hadn't happened so much, it actually happened in a big way, but not in the huge way that happened to us. We have historical records. We have documentation from a time when, for instance, the Tungus people that's the people who use the actual word shaman for their shamans, were still a very, very shamanistic people, and we have records and research was done at that time. And again, compared to us, these people are still very, very shamanistic today. So that's why Siberia, Mongolia, that area of the world is very interesting. It's not that shamanism isn't all over the world, it is, but that area is very interesting because they've preserved what was once there better than we have, better than people, probably as well as anybody else anywhere in the world, and better than most.
Would you say they're more animistic as well? Because
definitely.
Yeah, I found it very interesting when you were comparing the practice of Chalicity and developing Chalicity to basically becoming an animist.
Yeah, quite interesting. I would say that, I've been very friendly with a significant number of Mongolian people in my life. And what I would say is that they demonstrate animism even without thinking that they're animists. That making them true animists, some of them, yeah? Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. Remember what I said about animism being a state of being? It's not something that you choose to be, it's something that you are.
Yes.
And as I've said, I think before also, animism and Chalicity, to a certain extent, they are synonyms for each other.
Cool. So is there anything else you want to add with that exercise that you just talked about, the second exercise, in how it works together with the first exercise? Or would you say, step
it's just
one...
an alternative technique. It's an alternative technique. Cool. They both work on Bhatt, just the one that I described under this Yakut word, the tilin, this Yakut verb, which is a fantastic word. I just love that word. Yeah. I wish we had a word like that in English. Maybe we'll invent one someday.
It's going to be our mission. Let's get it into the Oxford English Dictionary.
Absolutely. It works. It's good for practicing Bhatt, just like the other one is. But this one also does work on your Amskar at the next level. So you get a double whammy.
But also, if you're getting a bit confused, people listening to this podcast, if you're getting a bit confused with when we're talking about the Amskar, after we've talked about the first three stages, that is going to be the next thing that we go on to and talk about a little bit more. So do not worry. So I think there's one more thing I want to ask you before we move on to Tor-Shil-Teen that we were talking about in last episode, just clarify, because in last week's episode you mentioned that you don't like the term meditation, and I've mentioned it a few times this episode. So maybe you were believing that people would get the wrong idea of what we're talking about, Chalicity being a more focused, direct practice than the many, many guises that meditation takes. Because for me, for my definition of meditation, it helped, man. It really helped me. And I don't want people to dismiss meditation, rather know what we mean by it. So could you clarify a bit further what you mean by not wanting to use the term meditation?
Sure. It's like a lot of words in English, it has a lot of baggage for me. It has a lot of baggage for me that's associated with it. I've been interested in and studied the spiritual traditions of, you can probably tell my particular area of interest has been East Asia, in the broader sense. So that's a big chunk of the world. If you talk like we're just talking about the Yakut, Yakut, the Tungus people, the Mongolian people, China, Japan, and so on.
So Siberia, Mongolia, China, and Japan.
Both the Tungus people, they're called the Evenki. That's the modern politically correct term for them. The Evenki and the Yakut. They both live in Siberia. Just Siberia is such a big place, so you can think that the Evenki live in, if you like, central Siberia. Over a big area. Evenki is actually, the language, the Tungusic language, is actually used as a kind of lingua franca for different tribes and different cultural groups that live in that region of the world, very big region of the world. Remember, this is a very large part of the world's largest country. They use the other tribes, including the Yakut, they actually use the Evenki language as a kind of trade language when they're trading with each other. So, for instance, people who live in the Yakut society will know the word shaman because that's a Venki word. So Siberian shamanism is very special, but it's not different. And this is sort of answering your original question about the word meditation. It's very special, but it's not different. It's very special only in the degree to which it has survived. Mongolian shamanism has also survived to a very great degree. But the reason I use Mongol words more than I use Yakuto or Venki words is just familiarity. I'm quite familiar with a lot of these type of words. I'm quite happy to use any. Now, coming back to the term meditation, in the sense that I don't see it as stilling your thoughts. What we're trying to do is get rid of them. Yeah, we're trying to sweep them away. So, we talked about Oharai, the Shinto priest will come along. He's got this paper streamer stick with paper streamers and he'll sweep it over your head to try and sweep all the dust away from you, the hokori, the dust. Yeah. So I don't see it as stilling your thoughts, getting rid of them, sweeping them away, cast them aside. In practicing Chalicity, thoughts are not your enemy. Don't think that I'm saying thinking is your enemy. It's absolutely not. The baseline's important in life. But in practicing Chalicity, they absolutely are. In this one context, they are a problem for us because we are so attached to them, addicted to them, if you like. And
I think we're so attached to them that we don't even realize it. Or so many people don't even realize it.
Yeah.
Going through your mind's just constantly active.
We try to come to conclusions. We try to make judgments. We try to categorize things. And that habit in itself, any of those three habits that I mentioned there, will stop you achieving a state of Chalicity. You won't be able to do it if you try to do that. So you need to get rid of all of that. So if that's what you mean by meditation, getting rid of thinking, let's give it a rest. Don't think of getting rid of it permanently. Just think, let's give it a bit of a rest and do something else. If that's what you think meditation means, then I agree with you. Meditation is good for that. If you think meditation is more than that, then the more than bit may or may not be that helpful in understanding Chalicity.
Did you focus on your breath a lot? One of the practices you did?
Well, you remember you asked me, I think, in one of the very early podcasts, did I make a lot of mistakes? Yes, I did, Joe.
Yeah.
And one of them was to focus on my breath too much.
Too much, okay.
Because when you say focus on, we as civilized people, we start thinking, that focus on, that means I look at it and I start analysing it and thinking about it and all that stuff, which is the exact opposite of Chalicity. Yeah.
It's a step on the way, because you're still thinking.
Observe yourself. Remember, you observe the animal. Now observe yourself in the same way. You observe, say, the hatsuk. If you want to call it a goshawk, that you observe a goshawk, then you observe yourself in the same way, but in a state of Chalicity. I don't mean with a notebook, writing down notes and thinking, I don't like the colour of goshawks, or something like that, It's nothing like that. No judgments, just absorb.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, so what is the second component on Chalicity? Let's get right into it.
Well, as you know, Joe, a second component of Chalicity is what's known as Tor-Shil-Teel. And we do have, as you mentioned, I think one time in one of the podcasts, we have come up with
what minute, Damon, and what second of which podcast?
I have no idea. And I wouldn't go to the bother of figuring it out, Joe, and putting it in the notes below. Which we can
well, that would be using your baseline,
you
Damon.
Mentioned, yeah, exactly, yeah. You mentioned the word neoteny. Now, in biology, neoteny is the preservation of juvenile characteristics in the adult of an animal, of any given species. And human beings are, to a certain extent, very neotenous animals. Our lack of hair all over our bodies, or lack of any significant hair all over our bodies, would be an example of that. The young of many primate species, They tend to have less hair when they're young and more hair when they're older. Also, one of the reasons that men find women attractive is the kind of baby fat that stays in their faces, gives them these attractive round faces. That's another physically neotenous characteristic. So that's what neoteny means in the world of biology. So we sort of co-opted this word for tor-shil-teen because it does relate to part of what tor-shil-teen is about. Tor-shil-teen is about, as you said, a playfulness with the moment. It's about not being habitual. So the young of any animal, including human beings, they do this thing we call play. So in one sense, tor-shil-teen is like play. They play with things. We, for instance, give a child a particular tool or some implement. They may think of ways to use that, for instance, a ladle and a kettle. Yeah, they may think of other ways to use the ladle than simply to scoop the water into the kettle. For instance,
I teach kids, full classrooms of kids doing guitar, which is interesting in itself. But 30 kids with guitars, you tend to notice things, and it's interesting. They'll do everything but actually play the guitar. So they'll twiddle all the knobs and they'll lick it, and
of course they will.
They'll pull the strings and they'll. Hit each other.
Because they have a degree of tor-shil-teen.
Yeah.
Now, to be a shaman, remember we said the vast majority of members of the population, even in an animistic community, aren't interested in what goes on underneath the bonnet of nature. The metaphorical bonnet of nature, what goes on behind the scenes. But shamans are. How do shamans approach nature in order to get an idea of what does go on behind the scenes? Again, I don't just mean on the baseline. Top line, midline, baseline, branches and leaves, trunk of the tree, roots of the tree, all acting together, mind, body, and spirit. Using all of those as one united entity, shamans approach nature with a spirit of neoteny, with a spirit of tor-shil-teen, with an experimental playfulness. So one of the ways tor-shil-teen was introduced to me by one of my guides, my guides, human guides, not spirit guides, was we were out one day going through the woods. There was like a stream, and I said something like, I'll try to find a way to get across the stream. Probably or most people have been in this situation. There's a stream. It was a fairly sizable stream. It was, if you go in, you're going to get very wet, basically. Mm-hmm. So I'll try to find a way to cross the stream, and my guide said no. Basically, the idea that I was given was, there are many ways to cross the stream. Find them all. And so we spent, I don't know, an hour or two, finding paths across the stream, different ways of getting across the stream. We weren't analyzing it, weren't standing on the bank. And this is here's another shamanistic technique, if you like. This one's for tor-shil-teen. Find yourself a stream, but don't stand on the bank thinking. I don't know if you've seen those sort of team building exercises to get where they have to figure out how to build a bridge across the river. We're not talking about building a bridge here, yeah? Yeah. We're just talking about what the difference is. Along the bank I go. As soon as I find a way to get across, or multiple ways to get across, I start playing with them, or I start chucking rocks over or stuff. But it's doing it in a state of Chalicity, doing it without thought. And the thing that was really interesting to me by the time we'd finished this particular exercise was that I had set out, I knew at the end why my guide, my teacher, had said no. It seems like a strange thing to say. It's to most people that would be like, no, we don't want to go across the stream. But it was just the opposite. It was like, no, that's the wrong way to think about it. Don't find a way to get across the stream. Go and play with all the many ways there are to get across the stream. That's tor-shil-teen. So this is a great shamanistic exercise. You find yourself a stream, and, and at the end of this, I understood where the no came from. there were so many ways to get across the stream. It wasn't real.
Do you know what struck me about that, though, is it sounded like you were having lots of fun as well.
It was thoroughly fun exercise, and I do this kind of thing a lot.
Yeah, so it's not like you go off, I've got to cross the stream now, I've got to find a million ways to do it. It's not like that. It's like, let's build a bridge out of stones, let's cut down some thickets and play, and it's like it's got this happiness to it.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, fantastic. And incidentally, I mean, there's lots of great locations to do this, but there's, in Cornwall, if anyone ever visits Cornwall, there's a place called Glither Falls. I could spend the rest of my life, just finding ways to cross that stream or river. There's so much variety. It's wonderful. And what this technique teaches you is that human beings tend to think of nature as simple. It's like binary. Oh, either I can get across the stream or I can't. Yeah. But actually the reality of nature is wonderfully and bewilderingly complex. And it's fantastic. And what a great way to practice your Chalicity. So there you are. There's your first technique for practicing Tor-Shil-Teen. Find yourself a stream and start playing. Start playing.
Stream. I can always count on you to come up with the most bizarre exercises. There's fantastic.
A great YouTube video which you might be able to look up. It's an orangutan exhibiting Tor-Shil-Teen. I think it's an orangutan, and there are 2 tiger cubs, like fairly old tiger cubs. They're not as young as the young. And this thing's finding as many ways as it can to irritate these tiger cubs. It's you've probably, I don't know if you've seen that one, but basically this orangutan
I've seen it. It's absolutely brilliant,
tweaking their hair. So there's one you can put in the show notes if ever you wanted to see a masterful demonstration of Tor-Shil-Teen, that video is it, yeah.
So that's looking at the playful nature of Tor-Shil-Teen then?
Yeah.
So that's looking at the playful nature. So does that relate to the with the moment section of playfulness with the moment?
Of course, it's in the moment. You can't do Tor-Shil-Teen with a desire for the future. Tor-Shil-Teen is done with no desire for the future, and no thought or clinging to the past. Tor-Shil-Teen, like Bhatt, is of the moment. Like the whole of Chalicity, really, is of the moment. But there are other ways to look at Tor-Shil-Teen. Another exercise, shamanistic exercise, I'm not sure I'd call this a technique, it's more of an exercise, that will give you an idea about Tor-Shil-Teen is, this is on a longer time scale. But it is of the moment because you have to be quick and you have to spot it. And it's quite difficult to spot. But very often as people go through life, there are times when you will say something like, I'm not the kind of person who ... fill in whatever the dot is, yeah? Or I'm not comfortable ... And whenever you say that, and you know that there are other people in the world who are very comfortable doing that thing, that you're not the kind of person who ... and, or you're not comfortable doing ... then go and do it. Go and do it.
What? I mean, a few years ago, I would say I am definitely not the kind of person who would start a podcast would start a podcast full stop, but start a podcast on shamanism? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would never have thought that. And I would never have thought that I would be the kind of guy who would start a business full stop. So it's very, very interesting for me that you've just said that. And that's an aspect of Tor-Shil-Teen.
Yeah, so in the moment, Tor-Shil-Teen is of the moment, but that doesn't mean that it can't be influenced by stuff like that you do on a longer time scale. As I said, there are things that I do. Remember, I talked about land art. And land art, again, as I said, there's different types of land art. Land art is where you go out in the natural world and you make art out of nature. And I'm kind of I don't know what land artists would say, but maybe I'm at one of the extremities of land art. I try to make art that looks like it could have happened just through the actions of nature.
Yep.
But in doing so, I don't have a grand vision in my mind about what it's going to end up like. I could do that, but if I did that, then I wouldn't be practicing my Chalicity. What I instead do is I do this land art just like out crossing the stream. I start playing with what's there, see what feels good, very often I'm making some sort of sacred space, what you would call a sacred space for my shamanistic practice. And I start playing with what's there, start moving things around. So this is not me building a picture and, everything's going perfectly into place. I just start playing. And it's definitely play. This word play is as close in English, I think, as we can get to tor-shil-teen. Of course, the issue is that adults frown. Adults who play, imagine, you're in a business meeting, and you start pulling the guy next to you's ear to see what'll happen or something like that. Adults tend to frown on this kind of thing, and you probably get chucked out of the business meeting if you start doing that kind of thing, But an orangutan will definitely have a go at that, for instance, So this is where Bhatt and Tor-Shil-Teen, they support each other. They're mutually supportive. You need a good deal of Bhatt. You remember we talked about not caring what people think of you. Very often to practice your Tor-Shil-Teen, you need a good
not caring what people think of you. I mean, that's a big one for me as well, because it's like, and I would imagine it's the same for a lot of our listeners. That anxiety you feel about going and talking to somebody new, why do we feel that? What's that about? It should be more if we had Tor-Shil-Teen, we had a good amount of Tor-Shil-Teen, it'd be like, oh, doesn't matter, boom, playfulness with the moment. Just talk to them. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter about the outcome.
Involve them in what you're doing, or at least give them the opportunity, because what you're doing, if you're out practicing Tor-Shil-Teen, probably what you're doing is far more interesting than what they're doing. So,
Okay. I did interrupt you there. I do apologize. What were you saying?
No, that's fine. So you can think of also just in general things that you do in a habitual way. You could do them differently. One of the things for people who are left-handed, or people who are right-handed, just do those things that you normally do with that hand with the other hand, just in a playful way. Not for any particular reason.
I get what you're saying. There's that background, because somebody might listen to what you've just said there and just go, why? Why would you do that? And that's it. It's like, well, why not? It's
well, there's
fun.
There's two answers to why. If you want a baseline answer to why, is because in the process of having fun, in the process of doing this experimentation, this is a baseline explanation. You're building your Chalicity. That Chalicity will build a foundation for further layers of shamanism that you build on top of that. It will not just provide a foundation, it will be crucial to making those layers effective. So the answer to why you would do that is ultimately the effectiveness of your shamanism.
Cool. You've alluded to this, but everything we've talked about is connected, right? And by this, I mean, does working on your Bhatt, to some extent, help with Tor-Shil-Teen? They mutually support each other. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All three do. They're not different from each other. This is what you find through practicing them. When I started out practicing these things, I thought they were separate because they're presented to me as separate. But remember we said, this word Trinity, yeah?
Yes.
The itty bit on the end means unity. They are one thing. They are not. There are three different ways of looking at exactly the same thing.
It's interesting because when I first learned about it, they felt very separate. And then the more I got to know them, the more I think, oh, hang on.
Exactly.
No, but if you practice that, then that develops as well. And if you practice Bhatt, then your Tor-Shil-Teen develops. And and practicing those two obviously helps you with your guchach, because that's your grace. That's the skill that you develop over time.
And as you start practicing the techniques, the shamanistic techniques, for instance, the few we've described for Tor-Shil-Teen, there are many, many, many more. By its very nature, Tor-Shil-Teen is a great one for coming up with ever more shamanistic techniques. And there are a lot of existing traditional shamanistic techniques that fall into the Tor-Shil-Teen category. You find that whichever technique you practice, you start off thinking that that's it. For instance, you get baseline stuff again. Oh, this is a Tor-Shil-Teen technique. I'm working on my Tor-Shil-Teen. My focus is on my Tor-Shil-Teen. And you get good at it, or you practice it a lot and think, hey, this is a Bhatt technique as well. Oh, yes, and it's a guchach technique as well. They're all three.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Right. So is there anything else you want to talk about with Tor-Shil-Teen? Is there anything else you want to clarify?
Do you remember we were talking about people defining themselves through their values, and how we find people with very strong values attractive in at a certain level. Even sometimes, historically, when those values, the values themselves have been pretty reprehensible, some people have still been attracted to those people on the basis that they offer solidity in a world where a lot of people have been made unsettled or uncomfortable, feel like they're not standing on solid ground because of the miasma.
Yes.
So yet another Tor-Shil-Teen exercise or technique, which a couple of my different teachers from different traditions have brought to my attention, or got me practicing. These are actually from different countries, so I think this is probably quite a useful. I guess you describe it as an esoteric technique. That is, what we said about esotericism. Mm-hmm. Esotericism is the survival of shamanistic activity into a settled and civilized society. It changes its nature, and that is to actually become somebody different. If you want, for a day, have a holiday. Create a set of values that are not your own, and then go out and be the person who has those values for a day. In some ways, this is like, we sort of jokingly, one time, myself, I don't know if you were involved, there was a few people then, we jokingly came up with this acronym XRPG, whereas, like role-playing games, role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, where you create a character sheet and you fill in, various their strength and and you create different characters to play in the game. So we came up with this idea of an extreme role-playing game where you just literally create a real person, and you go out and be that person who has a completely different set of values to you. Tor-Shil-Teen is a loving thing. There's a lot of love in Tor-Shil-Teen. So it's not, you don't want to be creating somebody who's malicious or unpleasant or vengeful, anything, and nothing like that. Yeah. Tor-Shil-Teen has, kind of that, was that lyric, all you need is love, and this is said in shamanistic circles a lot, and it is true at a certain level. But it's I forget what you call it, the woo-woo stuff. It's heavily associated with the woo-woo stuff, but create loving characters. Create characters and then go and really be that person. I guess a bit like...
Don't just play it in a fictitious world. Yeah, you're actually go and be that person.
Be that person. Have different values. And again, a bit like spirit animals, you go and be somebody who has different values from you. Literally be that person. Don't pretend, don't act, be that person. And then when you come back, a bit like with the spirit animals, when you've taken on a spirit animal and the shamanistic state is resolved, you come back and then you see the world differently. You see the world slightly through the eyes of that spirit animal. This can be a very, very enlightening thing. And as you know, Joe, some of these, this is something that I practice quite a lot in my life. And some of those people, on occasions, I've got so heavily attached to being that person that actually sometimes I prefer that person to me. And it's because you can create somebody great, you can create somebody amazing. I don't mean great in terms of what we would say is great in terms of successful or something. No, I'm not. That's nonsense in terms of shamanism. I mean somebody great, somebody who's more loving, somebody who's more open, somebody who's, I guess, when we get to talk about, when we get into talking about what the trigrams and 64 hexagrams mean in terms of people. I'm naturally somebody, we have to get onto that and we ain't got time now, but I'm naturally somebody who has a yang baseline. Naturally, I'm not the sort of person, there you go, there's that phrase again, talking about Tor-Shil-Teen, I'm not the sort of person who goes around hugging people. But as you know, I'm probably the person who hugs people more than anybody else, right?
Yeah. You're purposefully addressing what you know is your nature and going, oh, hang on, let's play with it. Let's kind of do the opposite for a bit. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, I'm naturally close. I say naturally. It's nothing natural about it.
No, it's your upbringing, isn't it? It's your
I'm
social
socially
conditioning.
conditionedly a closed person. So I go around making a solid effort to be an open, warm, welcoming person.
It's interesting when you were talking about the animals because a thought struck me, and that is our closeness to the bonobo chimps. I mean, have I got that right? Because the bonobo,
very interesting.
But the bonobos are very playful creatures. They're very. One of their striking characteristics is they do tend to be very playful, a lot more than the other primates. So
they're great bonobos. They're fantastic.
Yeah,
They're like so closely related to us and to chimpanzees, but their way of resolving problems, of the three of us, the three closest related of these, the chimpanzees, the bonobos and us, they are the least reprehensible of the group. They solve their difficulties through love, through grooming, through sex. Sometimes they solve all of their difficulties, or a large proportion of their difficulties, through loving activity. It's fantastic. I love bonobos.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Great stuff. Well, I'll ask you again. Anything else you want to talk about?
No.
Or should we call it a do there?
That's good. Thanks, Joe.
All right. Great stuff. So next week, I guess we'll maybe kick the episode off with a bit more on Tor-Shil-Teen if we need to. And if not, we'll go on to Gukach and have a bit of a chat about that. So
yes,
until next time, see you next week.
Thanks a lot.
Cool.